Carolina Panthers legend and soon-to-be Hall of Famer Steve Smith Sr. just gave a very controversial take on the job security of current Carolina Panthers head coach Frank Reich. So in this video, we're going to discuss what Smitty had to say, and I'm going to give you my thoughts on this whole ordeal, and we're going to get into all of that right after this. I'm from the foe, you dig? Welcome to The Way I See It with Jamario Rashad. This is a Carolina Panthers fan channel. Please do me a favor by hitting the like button, and please make sure you subscribe as I am on my road to 3K. Trying to make sure my channel continues to grow as my team continues to look like shit this season. Now that that's out of the way, let's go ahead and get to what Agent 89 had to say about Frank Reich. So if you have not tuned in to the most recent episode of Steve Smith's Cut to It podcast, he took the time to cut out an entire segment to give his thoughts on whether or not the Carolina Panthers should in fact fire Frank Reich, whether it be now or later. So before I give you my thoughts on what Steve Smith had to say, I'm actually going to give you the opportunity to listen to it, and then I'm going to come back and react. So let's listen to what Steve Smith had to say, and then I'm going to come back and give you all my thoughts.
That's fair. That's fair. But what is the temperature down in Carolina right now? How are people feeling about Frank Reich? Should he be on the hot seat, or do you think pump the brakes, give it a second?
I think pump the brakes. I don't think it's fair to fire Frank when there's so many things, right, that are out of his wheelhouse in regards to the product on the field. Frank didn't have 8 penalties for 90 yards, equaling up to 5 first downs. 2 turnovers, week 11 versus Dallas, 4th game with 2+ turnovers. That's not Frank, right? You can coach and you can hold guys accountable, but you hold them accountable after the actions or the penalties have been made or the mistakes. Mm-hmm. I don't necessarily believe it should all fall on Frank, because there are some things that are outside of his wheelhouse that I believe you should allow him to at least have a full calendar year to implement his plan. There's some people who believe that nothing he's done thus far has deemed him getting a job in the beginning, and I disagree. If we look for every fault for every head coach, nobody will be hired. No one is batting 1,000 as a head coach. Right there in New England, he's won 6 championships just for New England, not the ones that he's won on different staffs. So no one's perfect. But I want to give Frank more time to, you have a full year of free agency of implementing your defense. Like, if you fire Frank right now, which I'm totally against, and you bring in someone else, some other guru, somebody else with a fresh perspective, here's what he has to bring in, and I got to use my blank card in this. So he has to get some depth at corner, right? You got J.C. Horn, who hopefully will be back soon, but he's injured. Not his fault, but he's injured. Dante Jackson, I believe, maybe they have already done his option year off his rookie deal, or maybe they let him walk. Hill has been playing pretty good compared to a guy who's had his struggles, but I think he's played a pretty good half. He did a pretty good job against CeeDee Lamb. CeeDee Lamb didn't have, 11 catches for 150 yards. Yeah, he had a touchdown, but CeeDee Lamb is no slouch. CeeDee Lamb is a heck of a route runner, right? And they're featuring him out the wazoo. This is a team, man, you're 2 years away. And you got to let your head coach implement his system. Your general manager is actually general managing because you allow Matt Rule to kind of have final say. I think you got to give someone a full 365 days to really assess versus giving somebody 6 months and say, hey, the outcome isn't great.
The lack of patience, this isn't a Panthers fan thing. This is an every fan base thing. The lack of patience. It's It's so rare where a coach actually deserves to get canned year one.
What's up, Panthers fam? Thank you for checking out the video, and I want to remind you that the way I see it is now partnered with BetUS. If you use the promotional link in the description of this video, you will receive up to a 125% deposit bonus on a minimum deposit of at least $100. Meaning if you deposit just $100, you will then receive $225 to do your betting with, as well as 30 risk-free bets on top of that. So if you would like to get in on the action, please use the promotional link in the description of this video. And if you do so, just know that you are supporting me as well as this channel. Thank you. It seems as though he is completely against the idea. He was copying plea after plea, stacking excuse after excuse as to why Frank Reich should not be fired. So if it is not clear at this point, I am for one on the complete other side of the spectrum of this argument, and I have a couple reasons why, but I will directly address those by way of addressing the points that Steve decided to speak on. Now, the first one that I want to address is saying that it is supposed to be, or it would be somewhat unfair of him not to be fired without getting an entire he seemed to allude to him not getting an entire off season, of him not having enough time. I would like to remind everybody that Frank Reich was one of the earliest hires that happened in the off-season process. He was brought in, had an introductory conference, had all of the things, had meetings with the team prior to the draft, prior to free agency, prior to OTAs. He was in the building early, had the ability to choose his staff, and had full control over everything that even an established head coach that had been there for years would have had control over. So saying that he needs more time, or assuming or alluding to the fact that he may not have had enough time, I have to call BS on that, because we've seen other coaches do it in a shorter amount of time. So whether or not Frank Reich can do it is something that's still to be seen. But if we are using the sample size of these 10 games that we've seen so far, he has shown us that he probably is simply not the guy to do the job. Now, everybody likes to go back on these historical references and talk about guys like Peyton Manning, and talk about like Troy Aikman and guys like that. Now, Troy Aikman I may have to sit him to the side for this argument, but when you look at Peyton Manning, yes, he had a 1-16 rookie year. Yes, he threw over 20 interceptions, I believe so. But guess what? That coach that he did that under was not his damn coach the next year. His rookie year, he was coached under Jim Mora, and then the next season he had Tony Dungy, who was then eventually revered as Peyton Manning's most notable coach for the earlier portion of his career, and possibly for the entirety of his career, depending on who you ask. But when you put a new person in place, that is when you started to see a better outcome from the young hotshot quarterback. Now, let's take this to a more recent example. We have the debacle that happened down in Jacksonville with Trevor Lawrence during his rookie season, where the Jacksonville Jaguars elected to hire Urban Meyer and fire him, I believe, less than halfway into the season, or at whatever portion of the season that they fired him at, and they were 3-14 in the year. And then you just hire Doug Peterson, who comes in and in one off season is able to take that team that was 3-14 to the playoffs, eventually losing in the first round, but turning Trevor Lawrence into a completely different quarterback, excelling the progression that he has so desperately missed out on during his rookie season. We've seen example after example of sometimes it just takes a new coach being in place for a young quarterback to actually meet his ceiling, or just get off of the floor that it seems that he may be stuck at. See Mike McDaniel and the impact that he had on Tua Tagovailoa. As of right now, we have not seen Frank Reich have any type of positive impact on Bryce Young whatsoever. Bryce Young does not look like the processor that everybody assumed he would be. He looks a little bit shell-shocked, and he is not even calling up plays and innovating an offense that would lead for a rookie quarterback that needs to almost exclusively play out of the gun. He is not. We don't have the it's so many things that go against Frank Reich, and so many demerits that I would put against him, that it is just showing that he is more than likely simply not the guy for the job. And I believe it's more than fair to start making these assumptions even this short period into the season. Now, I also want to speak on the fact that Steve Smith said that, oh, we can't blame these penalties and all of these things. Now, when in the hell have we not been able to blame lack of discipline? Is that not a coaching thing? Or when the hell has that ever been, oh, we're going to blame the player? Oh, well, you're either coaching it or you're condoning it. So which one is Frank Reich doing? He may not be coaching it, but he's damn sure allowing them to do it. And there was much on display in this most recent game in Dallas. But we talk about all the turnovers that have been allowed. Now, let's add a little bit more context to these turnovers. At least 2 turnovers over the last 4 weeks, I believe that's what the stat that Steve Smith said. So why are these turnovers taking place so often? Well, that is because Bryce Young is throwing interceptions. Now, this video is not to pile on Bryce Young, but to just highlight the fact that the reason Bryce Young, or one of the reasons that Bryce Young is throwing interceptions, aside from the fact of just rookie growing pains, is the fact that his offensive line is just completely ass and cannot block for him on any given any given pass down, and in any given obvious passing situation. They're going to get cooked by any average pass rusher on the other side of the ball, and that is at all 5 of those positions that line up in front of Bryce Young. Now, that personnel that just allows for these defenders to just get to him in less than 2 seconds, that has our rookie flustered, that forces him to throw into tight windows that he probably shouldn't have thrown into. Who is responsible for fielding those guys and putting that personnel out there on the field to protect for our supposed to be franchise quarterback at this point in time? There's no other finger to be pointed at other than our head coach, because if we're going to constantly say that our previous head coach just had total control over the draft and who we drafted, why in the hell would we assume that the new coach that we hired would just somehow miraculously not have at least somewhat of that same control that the previous coach had? Well, I'll let you answer that, but I'll bring that up to say that Frank Reich is definitely, he does hold some culpability for those turnovers, because he cannot, he doesn't field a team that can allow for a rookie quarterback to have a clean pocket and allow him to get through his reads and make accurate passes. That is 1000% on Frank Reich. So I disagree with Steve on that one. But one point that Steve did make that I want to say that I somewhat do agree with, but there are a few caveats to how I feel about it, and that is the point of him saying that there are people out there that felt as though Frank Reich doesn't deserve to be a coach overall, that he did anything that his resume does not warrant him being a head coach at this point in time. I want to say that is not necessarily true, and I disagree with that. But when you look at his resume and what he has been able to provide for the NFL teams that he's coached for, either the head coach or the offensive coordinator position, I do believe that it is fair to say that Frank Reich was probably not the guy for this job right here. And I say that because there is no evidence, or little to no evidence, of Frank Reich being a guy, an offensive guy that actually has the ability to help a quarterback progress. Now, why do I say that? It is very well known, well documented by Frank Reich himself on record multiple times that during that run with the Philadelphia Eagles back in 2017, Doug Peterson, the head coach, was the standing head coach, but also the standing play caller at the same time. That is something that Frank Reich, even to this day, tries to emulate with what he does with Thomas Brown. But with Nick Foles winning that Super Bowl, that was Doug Peterson calling those plays. With Carson Wentz progressing from his outstanding rookie year to seeming like he was going to have an even better second year, that has to be attributed to Doug Peterson. Why do I say that? Yes, I understand that Frank Reich was in the building. This is supposed to be a collaborative effort. But when I look at what Doug Peterson was immediately able to do for the likes of Trevor Lawrence, it makes it hard for me to believe that Frank Reich had his hands too much on the situation with Carson Wentz a few years before that. Now, fast forward when Frank Reich actually is afforded the opportunity to become a head coach, he gets to Indy. The only time that he actually makes the playoffs, the only time that he actually has success is when he has a potentially Hall of Fame level quarterback that he inherited, that he did not have to progress or he did not have to develop. Let me stop saying progress. I believe the word would better be the better suited word for this is the players that he did not necessarily develop. That being Andrew Luck, who was already outstanding by the time that Frank Reich got there, as well as the other time that he made the playoffs was with the likes of Phillip Rivers, who had already been like a fully formed Phillip Rivers at that time. When he did not have those Hall of Fame level players taking snaps for him, he never made it to the playoffs, and he eventually got fired halfway through his final season in Indy. So there's no evidence on his resume, if you ask me, of Frank Reich being one that is able to step in and help hands-on with the development of a young quarterback. So people that feel as though he was not the right hire for this situation, I do think it's very fair that they make that assumption, and it's turning out to look like they may kind of be right if that is the position that they chose to take on this particular issue. Now, I also want to say that I brought this up earlier. Frank Reich just wasn't an early hire. He had the entire offseason to come in and do everything. But the point that Steve made is you need time to implement these systems. You need to, no, Frank Reich is a tenured head coach that has a lot, over 20 years of experience, like probably over 30, 40 years of collective coaching and playing experience. So he should be able to come in, know what he wants, know how to speak the jargon, know how to disseminate that information out to the players, and try to hopefully be able to communicate in a way that is able to effectively get the idea out and get the idea through these guys' heads. So far, the system that Frank Reich has wanted to implement has just been pretty much terrible, and I don't know why anybody would want for this to. I don't see what fruits that this offense could bear. There's nothing that could be there's nothing that could be tailed off from this. There's nothing that could be added. It's plain vanilla archaic ass offense. There's very little that could be done because the foundation of this offense is so bare and just so terrible. So Frank Reich had an entire offseason to not only draft players that he thought would be suited for this system that Steve feels as though he has not had the opportunity to implement. He also had an entire free agency period for that. As I mentioned, he had the draft. He has had practice squad players. He has had 10 weeks of players getting cut from other teams. He's had time to at least identify players that could come in and run the system effectively that he needs them to run, and still to this day he has not been able to do that. So why should we as the fans have any confidence in this guy whatsoever? I say we simply should not, because his ability to work with our standing general manager at the time and the draft class that they put together over this last year does not look like it's going to bear fruit whatsoever, which takes me into my final point about what Steve Smith talked about, saying that, if we have a new guy coming in, then we would have to have all of these things. All of these things are going to be needed. He mentioned the cornerback. He mentioned the complete philosophy change, and he failed to mention a pass rusher, which we so desperately needed. I can't let that go by without saying each and every one of those things is something that we needed after last season that we honestly just didn't directly address in the draft this year, and pretty much we didn't do so in free agency either. Our wide receiver isn't good. Our third rounder that we drafted at 25 years old, coming off of a position change, has been completely terrible and is probably going to be at best a special teams player throughout his career. He hasn't worked out. So all of these things that a new coach would have to come in and feel, it's something that we can already say that Frank Reich has shown that him and his expertise and him and his collaboration with Scott Fitterer, they can't feel that shit either. So why wouldn't we just give another coach that opportunity, man? But with that being said, I am going to stop belaboring all of these points. Those are my thoughts on this entire situation, man. What do you think about Frank Reich, and or what do you think about Steve Smith's comments on Frank Reich and the fact that he does not think that Frank Reich should be fired as of right now. He actually thinks that that would be a negative, and he said that this team is about 2 years away from being good. Like, I don't even know if in contention is it or just good, man. What are your thoughts on this topic? Please leave your comments down in the comment section, and I will be sure to get back with you then. But until next time, I am Jamario Rashad. This is the way I see it, and I'm out. Peace.